There's one recent Spider-Man comic, you may have heard of it, it's called Jackpot and Black Cat. It's genuinely really awful. Now, essentially, to give you guys a rundown in case you haven't heard of it, it is an extension of the Amazing Spider-Man books, essentially a spin-off for Mary Jane and Felicia Hardy on their adventures as Jackpot and Black Cat. By the way, if you're wondering who Jackpot is, yes, that is Mary Jane's superhero alias. But it does not live up to any sort of redeeming quality, and quite frankly, it's actually an insult to Spider-Man as a character and these characters that it tries to portray in this book. It's the most poorly executed story that I've read in a very long time, but not only that, they managed to exemplify all the major issues fans like you and I have with the 616 Spider-Man comics today. But before we get into that, I want to urge you guys to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We're so close to 30,000 subscribers, so I would really love if we could hit that goal this year. That would be absolutely awesome. But with that said, let's get straight to it. First of all, it doesn't help that this book includes 3 of the characters that are considered to be very poorly written within Spider-Man comics as a whole. Those, of course, are Mary Jane Watson, Felicia Hardy, and Paul. All 3 of these characters have been poorly received by fans and have been featured in countless Zeb Wells Amazing Spider-Man books. That is all you should really have to know.
You just said poorly received.
Oh. Now, everyone knows that the character that has been completely mistreated the most out of these 3 is, of course, Mary Jane Watson. Now, essentially, this book follows Mary Jane as she tries to uncover the secret of this app called Obscura. Now, Obscura is an app which basically threatens people into doing its bidding, or else them or a loved one that they care about dearly will be hurt in the process. This is set up immediately in the first couple of panels, revealing that Felicia is actually one of the victims of the app, having to commit heists for whoever is behind the scenes running the operation. MJ clocks onto this and decides to help Felicia against her will, and that is basically the main premise of this entire book. Also, Paul's here too, and you know, he can hack now. Yeah, apparently he's a hacker. You know, I don't know where we got, you know, there. I don't know how that happened, but it's in this book. But either way, my first issue comes straight away in the first opening few panels, as Mary Jane as Jackpot flies through the sky as she narrates very mysteriously. First of all, the way that MJ is written here makes her sound like Batman. She's not Batman, okay? She's Mary Jane Watson. We then cut over to Black Cat and she's doing the same sort of thing, and it's really annoying. Apart from both of these characters talking like they're coming straight out of the Dark Knight, most pieces of dialogue following this, whether it would be with one another or characters themselves, is all exposition based. The issue with this kind of narrative, specifically in this book, is that it's very tech based. Like, everything needs to be spoon fed to you, because in layman's terms, a lot of this stuff doesn't really make sense. Like, it's kind of, oh, Paul is hacking here. How does he hack? We have no idea. There's this app over here. It controls what people do. Why? We have no idea. Basically, the whole book is just them explaining the plot to you. And you guys know how much I hate this. Characters explaining what's happening or just talking about things with each other that we've already seen is something that I really hate when movies, TV shows, or even comics do. There is maybe 2 conversations where I can recall where they kind of talk to each other about the well-being of other characters or themselves. One of them being where we are introduced to Felicia's new girlfriend, Amelia, which is pretty nice, and a scene where MJ and Paul talk about how they want to protect Felicia. But apart from that, that's pretty much it. There's nothing else in this book that really suggests that any of the characters have anything else going on other than trying to stop this mysterious app. But for a second, let's talk about Paul, because I bet a lot of people are dying for me to absolutely destroy him. But you know what? I'm not going to do that. And the reason for that is because in this book, Paul is actually probably the least of people's worries. Like, he's not a bad character by any means. He's just uninteresting. Basically, Paul is just the guy in the chair, and essentially he can hack really well. Who knows where that came from, but at least they're trying to give him something, so I gotta give him props for that. The issue I have with Paul comes from the fact that this guy is meant to be Mary Jane's new partner. It pains me to say it, but this guy is meant to be the love of her life at the moment. I know people will hate that either way, so we'll hate on Paul no matter what, if he's a good or bad character, but just hear me out. If you're going to write Paul in a comic book, and he's going to replace Peter as Mary Jane's husband, boyfriend, whatever he may be, he at least has to be a good character. He at least has to be convincing as a person. We've got to believe that Mary Jane would actually fall in love with this guy. We've followed Mary Jane for so long throughout Spider-Man comic books that she's a really important character to the audience. So the person that she ends up with also has to be important as well. But He's not. But yeah, Paul stays two-dimensional, boring, and quite frankly, blandly written, so, you know, he just serves the plot more than anything else, and that's kind of all he does. But that brings me on to my biggest problem with this entire book, and that is Jackpot, aka Mary Jane herself. Now, you guys know, if you've watched my other videos in the past about Zeb Wells' Amazing Spider-Man books, you know how passionately I feel about Mary Jane not having superpowers. We don't need Mary Jane to have superpowers. I've made countless videos on it in the past, so I'm not going to go too in-depth here. However, I just want to give a quick summary of my thoughts. Essentially, the reason why she shouldn't have powers is because she's already a well-rounded and really well-written character over countless stories in the past. Writers have shown why Mary Jane is a very strong character, and she can hold her own. She doesn't need her superpowers. For example, Paul is a character that probably needs superpowers more than Mary Jane does, because Paul is a two-dimensional, boring character, whereas Mary Jane has layers to her. She doesn't need powers. You see, I'm a firm believer that if you're going to make a change to a character, you have to make it count whether it's good or bad, which is why I'm rooting for Paul to be a good character. If you're gonna get MJ to date someone new, at least make them a good character. You wouldn't expect any less if a new character started dating Peter, would you? Exactly. So that brings me on to my point. Even though I don't agree with MJ having powers, I was looking forward for them to do something at least interesting with her new abilities in this series. If you haven't been following, essentially her new powers revolve around a roulette wheel, and whatever it lands on gives her that power, kinda like the Omnitrix from Ben 10 in the first couple of seasons. So, with that in mind, what would you expect them to do with these powers? Well, it would be really interesting if in certain scenarios she got powers that were completely useless to the situation and or environment, which could make for some really interesting character decision making, struggle learning curves, or fight sequences. Except they don't do that, not even once. Every single time MJ needs a specific power or a specific ability to fight some bad guys or get out of a situation, she gets it instantly, even though her whole power basis is based off a roulette wheel, which means she could get a random power at any point in time. She basically has this wheel of fortune where her powers are completely randomized, and the writers don't think once that maybe this could be interesting if she has to fight, I don't know, armed thugs with giant flashlight for hands, or maybe fight the Kingpin as a dwarf with the ability to spray Coca-Cola from her nostrils. I don't know, just do something interesting or weird or wacky. I don't know, you've got the power to do so, but they don't. Overall, I think this comic just completely personifies the whole idea that Spider-Man comics are kind of going downhill nowadays, especially the Amazing Spider-Man run. I'm really glad that we have the likes of Spectacular Spider-Man by Greg Weisman, and we have obviously Ultimate Spider-Man by Jonathan Hickman, because the Amazing Spider-Man is really going downhill, and Jackpot and Black Cat just completely solidifies this thought process that the Amazing Spider-Man books are just really, really bad, and all the characters surrounding them as well. I really hope they do something interesting with this book going forward, because it is only just started, but from the first few issues, you can already tell this is going to be an absolute stinker for the rest of the series. But either way, if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe, because I keep you up to date with everything from Spectacular Spider-Man to Ultimate Spider-Man. I review all of those books, so if you love that, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's try and get to 30,000 subscribers. I would love that, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and peace.